Welcome to the View Magazine's Rebel Justice podcast. This is the first part of this episode from our Someone's Daughter podcast series. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how governments suppress women who speak out and how the current criminal system can be extremely flawed towards women. Today's panel includes Alba Duque, a Spanish artist and photographer who mainly works in women's subjects, David Shaw, a lawyer from Instalaw who specialises in civil actions against public authorities, and Shivalee Patel, an activist who works in animal rights, mistreatment of workers, and also in the BLM campaign. This talk was hosted by The View Magazine's Clare Barstow, an activist and woman with lived experience. We began with showing a video of Carme Forcadell, a Spanish politician who was incarcerated, sharing her inspiring story as a part of Someone's Daughter exhibition. You can listen to its entirety on The View Magazine's YouTube channel or by following the link on the description. Alba Duque will begin by summarizing the highlights of the share. Thank you, Alba.
For those who doesn't know her, she's Carme Forcadell. She has been a political prisoner in Catalonia in Spain. She was the ordinary president of the parliament when the whole independent Catalonia thing happened. So basically she was condemned to 11 and a half years of prison for let people vote, let's say, right? So Catalan people made a referendum so they could vote if they wanted to be part of Spain or they didn't. And strangely, that in Spain is no democratical because the constitution says we can't vote for that. So she had the charges of rebellion. And after she was condemned that 11 and a half years, she along 10 other political prisoners, but there were only 2 women. And they are released now because the government in Spain changed, and the one who's now released them, of course, but they were in prison. She says she was in prison for 36 months. And, well, she talks about how being a woman in prison is twice a punishment because you have the sentence that the judges have given you. And she always says that how penal system is conformed by men and for men. She said of the 9 judges she had, 8 of them were men. And she talks of how being a woman in prison has this double punishment, right? One, the one that judges has given you, and the other one is a woman in a prison thought for and by men, right? So she talks about how they didn't have any spaces for thought for them, for women, right? And she talks about, for example, sports, right? All the things are thought for men, the food, the sports, the activities, the jobs. And she says that in prison, it doesn't change the way she thinks about politics or about what she did, but what prison has made to her, let's put it these words, is she's even more feminist than what she was. Because, she says prison is just the reflection of society, and if society is patriarchal, prison is going to be too, right? But get small goals in prison is very hard, has been very harsh. So she talks about how getting, for them to be allowed to have hair dryers has been a big fight that she says that together, and when they fight together inside prison, they could do that goals, and how important it is for us to empathize with people living in there, and especially with women who are, as I said, double punished. I think that's more or less.
Thank you very much. That was a brilliant introduction. And so now we're going to be talking today as part of the Photo London and View Magazine Someone's Daughter exhibition about how the government oppress women who speak out. And so my name's Clare, and I'm someone with lived experience, and I'm also an activist. I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel and they can talk a bit about themselves. So first of all, Alba, as an artist and photographer and all the other work you've done, could you speak a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, well, as you said, I'm a Spanish photographer and artist, and I work mainly in women subjects, let's say it this way. I'm especially interested in our relationships with our bodies and how it builds our self-esteem and how we need to earn that self-esteem in order to be able to raise our voices and be having spaces in society. And well, I've participated in Someone's Daughter project. One of my sitters were Karma, and the other one was Ada Colau, which is actually currently Barcelona's mayor. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, they were amazing photographs. Now, David, I know you work at Instalaw and you've done a lot of work in certain areas, in particular to do with the police and custody and deaths in custody. Could you elaborate on the work you do?
Yeah, so I specialise at the moment in sort of civil actions against public authorities, including the police, prisons, councils, anything really that's... I have a focus on human rights, data protection, false imprisonment, failures to investigate in terms of the police. So quite a varied practice. I used to do death in custody as in my former roles, but not so much in this one at the moment. So it's more of a focus on civil actions against public authorities, so enforcing human rights and the like.
Thank you. And Shivalee, I know you're an activist that's worked in areas such as animal rights, textile, mistreatment of workers, and also in the Black Lives Matter campaign. Would you like to elaborate on the work done and your life experience?
Yeah, so I've been a street activist since 2015. And I studied environmental management and learned a lot about the state of the world and the things that need a lot of attention. But it was only last year when I realized that there was a whole prison reform movement. And I shared a story about when I had been arrested during a domestic argument. And since then, I went on a healing journey because I felt like I was innocent and just a victim of my life circumstances. So now I'm actually a coach and helping people to heal from these issues that can sometimes lead us into criminal activity without meaning to. So that's why I'm really passionate about this, just humanizing people that are in prisons or being stigmatized by the law.
Yes, absolutely. How do you feel that the government oppress women in particular currently in your experience and what you've experienced out on the streets?
I haven't felt oppressed as an individual, but I feel like because of the way that the system is created and it was dominated by men, we are living in a patriarchy. And as a result of that, the way that we must judge people and the way that we've created these systems is going to be through the lens of that, the people that created it. So, I mean, even the fact that in the story that was just read out, that it takes so long to just get hairdryers put into female prisons and the sorts of activities that they're given being male-centered, it's just a reflection of how things do progress. And for me, it's like it seems to have taken some time to even get a vote, to even have a say in the way that the world is governed and the way that our society is structured. Even recently, I just had a baby, and the sorts of things that are available for women aren't really that empowering during a time where there's so much change and so many vulnerabilities in the transition from just being a maiden and having your first child financially and in so many different ways. It's like an uphill battle when you're a woman, just because of the way that our communities are set up. It doesn't really favoritize or even, just give us the kind of community structure that we actually need to thrive as women.
Yeah, and I suppose the support networks aren't there if you want to protest in a way, and then you're looking after a child, and then obviously there aren't creche facilities in certain areas. I suppose it makes it that much harder to try and be active at this time.
Yeah, I do feel like there's also the whole social media side of things. The algorithms that are out there favor certain types of people. I think it's mainly cis white men. And when the whole algorithm that's running the social media have those preferences, usually females and females of color tend to be kind of taken down in the ranks and not seen or made as visible on those platforms. So that's another way that I feel that the voices are being oppressed.
Yes. Is that your experience, David, with the legal work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I think it's across the board, really. I mean, the majority of my clients are men, because the majority of people that I represent are prisoners. But the women that I do represent, you find that, you know, the sort of things that they're trying to get access to within prisons, or even to get like complaints dealt with, it's sort of the responses that they get are just appalling sometimes. For instance, like I dealt with a lady who was assaulted by another female prisoner, and the lack of response from the police and the prison service during the investigation was appalling. And we ended up taking civil action, and they paid a compensation for it. But it's that, you know, that in that case she didn't get justice because the prison didn't investigate it properly. They didn't preserve evidence, and that's something that we're seeing quite a lot. To be honest with you. So yeah, I completely understand that. I mean, just touching on what Shivalee said about the sort of algorithms and stuff for social media. I mean, I just wondered, has any work been done on that in terms of, you know, seeing whether it is that algorithm that's doing it? Is there anything that can be changed? Because it seems to me, if you've got a lot of, you know, white men all running these companies, then is that part of the problem? Do they need, you know, women on at the higher range of it to put something in place so that isn't there? Because that's, if you think about it, like Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, that's where a lot of people get all their information nowadays. And if it is sort of tainted towards that, then nothing's going to change, is it? I think it's the same, you know, for the prisons as well. A lot of the governors, even in the female prisons in the UK, are men, and you get a lot of men working in the female prisons, and so it mustn't be like the lady was saying before, the Spanish lady, sorry, Catalonian lady. It must have been awful for her, you know, not to be able to get her hair dry. I'm not sure if that's the case over here, but yeah, if there are any prisoners out there and they can't get a hair dryer, then drop me a call, because we'll try and sort that out.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's a shortage of everything in women's prisons. Access to even the most basic things are impossible to get, and obviously during the lockdown, it's been even harder. But yes, it's very tough to get even the basics like sanitary towels and tampons. I mean, there's a bit of shortage of all sorts. And you know, I've written about menopause in prison, and you can't. How can you cope with things like when you're going through hot flushes and you can't get your bedding changed for a week? I mean, it's pretty awful.
Yeah, I'd say that borders on sort of inhumane and degrading, because I dealt with a client who he was suffering with bowel cancer. He sadly passed away, and they weren't giving him the pads the specialist pads that he needed, and so we brought a claim for breach of his human rights on that basis. And it did resolve when we submitted the claim, but then he got damages awarded for, you know, the treatment that he went through. So it's similar to that, really. So if they're not getting certain things that they need and should have access to, and I would have thought that if you can't get access to, you know, sanitary things, then it's that to me would be degrading and inhumane, and they should have access to it.
Yes, totally. And how do you feel, Alba, about your experience of in Spain, and also maybe hear about the way government oppresses women and their right to rebel?
What you were saying made me think about, like, it's another thing, but this one case in Spain in which 4 women were testimonies who said that they had been beaten by the people who worked there, or isolated when they shouldn't be isolated because they were dealing with mental health issues. So it's the same that always, right? Like, I wonder, like, if they were men, the response that, because they made a cause for it and they didn't want it didn't win, right? So it was just a brief story in one day newspaper. 4 women died that year in the prison in the same circumstances, right? It makes me think, like, would the story have been different if they weren't women but men, you know? I mean, you never know, but...
Yeah, I think women are silenced a lot in prison. They're afraid to speak out because they're primary carers, and a lot of them need access to children, so they want the phone calls. They're scared to actually be active, and in case they get punished, because if they get punished, then that means they get loss of canteen, like being able to buy things, so being able to get phone credit. And that's why a lot of men will campaign if there's something wrong in the prison, but a lot of women won't do that because they're frightened, and that's an added difficulty that they encounter. And I think, there's not enough understanding of that, and that's why a lot of women say, I can't possibly do a request complaint, no, I might lose something, I might not be able to speak to my daughter every week. I mean, that people don't realise that it's that much harder.
Or just being moved, they might move them away from, the prisoners get what they call ghosted, which means that they move you without any reason, any rhyme or reason, move you to another prison, 2 or 3 hours away from where you live. And then you find it difficult to get, meetings with or visits from family and children and all the rest of it. So I completely understand that.
That is so counterintuitive, because you're then re-traumatizing families, which then leads to more criminal activity.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think so. And do you think with the passing of this new police crime and sentencing bill about effectively, almost stopping the right to protest, having to protest in silence, how do you think that is going to affect the right of people to speak out? In particular, Shivalee, how do you feel about that?
It's quite scary, actually, to think that if there is any policies or anything that excludes certain people, things that may cause harm to our communities, not being able to go out and actually have a voice and be heard. Basically, they don't really want it to be a protest. They want it to just be a silent gathering, not really getting in the way, not creating any disruption. But without creating some kind of disruption, there's no way that they're going to take it seriously enough for something to be addressed. If there's not any traffic or any issues created for the economy, then there's no way that they're going to take it seriously enough for anything to be overlooked and changed. So, and now having a child as well, it's just even bigger concern that they're criminalizing people for protesting, because it makes me want to withdraw from doing such things, because I think if I go to prison, then what's going to happen to my son? What's going to happen to my family? And the whole bill just needs to be scrapped. And I'm not really sure if that's what's going to happen now, but it just makes things a lot more dangerous for human rights, for freedom of speech. And alongside them now building 500 new prisons, which I've heard, I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but 500 new prisons being...
500 new places in a prison for women, 500, a prison for women with 500 new places. When they said that they were actually going to reduce the number of women coming to prison, they launched a report about 3 years ago by the Social for Centre Justice, saying that they were going to cut prison numbers and look at alternatives to custody, but now there's been a total reverse. So going backwards and not forwards.
It feels like a step back, and on top of that, they're creating new things that can be criminalised. So
absolutely. How do you feel about that, David? Do you think this whole thing of going backwards, the reversal in, things might have looked a bit more positive a few years ago, but it seems like a lot of the rights are being eroded slowly, not outside in the community and inside prisons?
Yeah, I think in terms of the bill, there's no need for it. There's laws in place that criminalise certain acts already. I think the problem that they will probably find is that even if they arrest protesters under that bill and try to prosecute them, juries may still find them not guilty. But then, as Shivalee says, it's people. Well, I think the aim isn't so. The aim of the bill probably isn't to get convictions. It's to deter people from entering into peaceful protests. And and that's ridiculous. You shouldn't have that in a Western democracy. It's the cornerstone of our the heritage of this country, and all Western countries is the right to protest. And so it baffles me, to be honest. And what worries me as well is that it's a Tory government that are likely to erode human rights even further. And obviously, coming out of Europe in terms of the European Union, what then is going to happen with the European Convention of Human Rights? Because a lot of the sort of basic rights that we have is enforced under the Human Rights Act, which brings into force the European Convention of Human Rights. And I just wonder whether there's always talk from the Tories of scrapping the Human Rights Act. It's probably only a matter of time before they do it. And then if they did that, the challenges to these sorts of legislation that you could bring under the Human Rights Act are going to be gone, and you're probably left with an act that doesn't give you that mechanism of challenge. So that's something that I fear in the coming years. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But yeah, I don't think they need the bill. It just seems draconian to me. And so there's another question as well, I think, in there. Is it the prisons that get taken a step backwards in terms of expanding the prison places? Yeah, I think, I agree. I think they should be more focused on community rehabilitation, because I think, prison, if you're looking at sending anyone to prison for short periods of time, it just doesn't work. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of women who end up on short prison sentences have been subjected to a whole host of, atrocities throughout their lives. A lot of them suffer from domestic violence. Some of them have, undiagnosed mental health problems that they need assistance with, that led them down that route of offending. And so it's whether, prison probably isn't the answer to a lot of offenders, and that's probably, right for, a lot of men as well, but probably more so women.
Yeah, totally. This report that came out was supposed to be built on course, and it did actually say to conduct an intensive study about the fact that about 78% of women in prison have suffered incredible trauma in their lives, domestic violence, abuse as children, horrific trauma. And I know some men have too as well. Absolutely. But and they were looking, it was all about, we'll look to alternatives to custody, but it just feels like now that a lot of the charities and the women's centres aren't getting any of the funding, and it's like we're taking a step back. It's going back to before. So it seems like as soon as you try and make one step forward, you'd almost take two steps back, and it's quite scary how that is. I mean, how do you feel, Alba, about how women's rights are being eroded, and about the bill? I mean, is it like that in Spain to do with protests, or are you allowed a free reign more, and have you got more protection than in this country? How do you feel?
Well, I think that in particular in this topic, the main difference is that for what I have understood, in the UK there's not like a minimum, like minimum penalty time. Like a lot of women in prison are like having short time, right? Or it's not for me. Like in Spain, you don't go to prison unless you have a conviction.
Longer sentence, 2 years, and a lot of women go for 6 months or less. Yeah, and said there's no point if you're doing a sentence of less than 2 years, because you can't do any courses that could help you. So therefore, there's no point. So yeah, as you said, in Spain, they don't sentence short term.
Doesn't make any sense to me. Like it's more a punish than anything else, right? Like what are you gonna do in prison 3 months or 4 months, and after, like what happens after that? And I'm sorry, that wasn't your question, but it's just
And how about the police and criminal sentencing bill? How do you think that's going to affect the right to protest in this country?
I guess like best example of how things are is Karma being in prison, right? Like we went to go, and that was like illegal. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we can protest, but as long we do it in a certain way, right? Which is by government. So
And how do you think people's freedom of speech is being affected as a whole now in this country? Do you think people feel that they can speak out, or do you think they're too frightened? Shivalee, with your experience, do you feel sometimes frightened to speak out about certain things?
I don't feel frightened to speak up about certain things. Like, I feel it in my nervous system, the anxiety before speaking up. But with this new bill, it makes it a much more difficult journey from just being at home and then wanting to go out and actually speak up. But when there is a large group and there's a lot of people who are coming together for the same causes, it's almost impossible for them to have enough spaces in prisons for that many people. So I don't feel like there is this huge threat. At the same time, it does feel like they're trying to curb people from going, because maybe they saw there was many people going throughout lockdown. Even for Black Lives Matter, there was huge number of people showing up. And I feel like maybe this was one of the ripple effects, like them trying to create control, because they're realizing that more and more people are willing to go and make a stand for something that they care about. So even though I'm nervous, it's not going to be a massive deterrent, because there is enough people out there who are willing to band together and still try. But yeah, I think being a mum as well, it does add to that anxiety. And then it's just a shame, really, that these issues are occurring where people's human rights, where our human rights are all being kind of held under question, whether or not that's still going to be something that we get in the near future, or if we even have them now. And it just feels like a bit of an uphill battle sometimes, but we're learning how to dance in the rain and still keep going, even though they are putting a lot of pressure on us to keep us quiet.
Yeah. How do you feel, David? Does this affect people in prison and maybe also outside in the community, being able to feel that they've been silenced, that they can't express themselves freely?
Yeah, I think it will do. As I was saying before, I think part of the problem will be that people will feel that if they do go out and protest, that they might not feel as comfortable, might not feel that they can do certain things. It might lead to people who, would have gone out and protested, say before the bill was passed. You might think, I don't want as a criminal to lose a job. I don't want to do this, don't do that. I don't want to jeopardize, my reputation. And so I'm not going to go out and protest. You should be able to have that freedom to go out and not feel like you're going to be a criminal for protesting. So I think that's one of the issues for me, really. And it seems to be, like I said before, I think there are mechanisms in place already to deal with protesters, and we saw that with the Extinction Rebellion people who were prosecuted and got found not guilty, but they went through the justice process. The jury system obviously worked. The jury is a sort of reflection on society, and society said, well, no, they aren't guilty of anything. So then that should give the government, I would have thought, an indication of what society thinks that the bounds of protest should be. Otherwise, those people should really have been convicted if it should have been a crime, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. I know somebody who was involved with and did a sit-down protest, and they said originally that they weren't going to be convicted, but then they tried to do them on conspiracy, and now they're trying to prosecute her on conspiracy because they can't get it on any charge on the other. So it's almost like they want to try and increase and spill things out and try and make things to try and get a conviction, which is really sad. And Alba, in your work, do you find that some of the images that you make, do you find that you try and show women trying to express themselves or dealing with difficult circumstances?
Yeah, well, as I said, I focus a lot of women's body. I always felt like body for us is like the thing that like your body is a battleground, the main thing to conquer before going and conquer other things, right? Because I think we are so attacked on that since we are like literally kids or even babies. And when you don't believe in you, or when you hate yourself, because when you hate your body, you tend to hate yourself too, right? I mean, there's no you without your body, so it's kind of the same. It's harder to speak up, right? Or it's harder to fight for the things you should have, or the places you should be at. So yeah, I photographed a lot of women with a lot of different situations, and some of them very vulnerable ones. But what I try to do is always put everybody at the same level and work with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a long haul, the way, women are seen, and sometimes how you're viewed, and how you, a lot of women don't feel confident to get involved in or to speak out. A lot of women feel silence. They feel that they can't, they're scared to talk, whether they're in prison or whether they're outside in the community, and a lot of the issues that affect women have been silenced for so long, like the menopause, like, going through the periods. People were scared to talk about their bodies, and, breast cancer and all these things that I think, so I think it's been harder for women. And when a lot of these, either the companies or the governments have dominated by men, I suppose it is going to make people frightened to talk about issues that have been covered up for so long. And obviously it's harder in certain communities where religious reasons might be seen as a further barrier, and some areas like domestic violence might get hidden and not discovered because of women frightened because of the communities they live in.
The culture, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's very true.
Thank you very much for your time, Clare, Alba, David, and Shivalee, and for sharing with us your insights and individual experiences related to whether you feel that governments try to oppress women who speak out. This brings to a close the first part of today's episode, a discussion that focused on changing the way we perceive the rights of women who want to make a stand for themselves in the current criminal justice system. Our system is flawed. The lack of response from the police and a shortage of essentials in women's prisons are just a few indications of that. Someone's Daughter is an insightful photography exhibition which brings together world-leading photographers to take portraits of women campaigners, survivors, activists, and high-profile leaders. You can go online and search for Someone's Daughter to see how this campaign represents women who have lived experience in the criminal justice system. You can also read our stories in the View magazine and be inspired by these shocking narratives, but also by the constructive solutions presented. Thank you for listening.